Hi guys, today's lesson is on how to answer question 3 of paper 1. This is for GCSE English language for AQA. So first thing is understanding narrative structure. This is how a story is put together. So there's some key terms that we can use when we're answering our question 3. But this is also good for question 5, paper 1, knowing how to structure and write a story yourself. So we've got exposition. That's just a fancy word for the beginning of the story. We've got the rising action, sometimes called the complication. This is the indication that there will soon be a climax. So the rising action is where we start to get the reader excited. Now, you don't have to start a story with the beginning. You can start it immediately with the rising action, so something happening just to grab the reader's attention. Okay, we have our climax, which is the moment of the most action. This is where the problem or conflict occurs. So that's kind of based on the idea that there is no story unless something happens. There has to be some kind of climax, some kind of big event that we are building up to. And then finally, we've got the resolution. That's the end, that's how the problem has been sorted. Now, these are just basic techniques. I haven't included falling action, which is the other side of the climax, where things begin to calm down. Just given the immediate beginning, rising action, climax, and resolution. Okay, so just the few major steps. These are just nice things to mention when kind of analysing structure. How these are used, so it's really important because a writer can use this in a story to make it as interesting as possible. And this is what this question is all about, is how has it been interesting? So like I said before, you don't have to begin at the exposition. You could begin at the rising action, for example, you could have characters about to fight. You could have it beginning at the climax, so in the middle of the fight, or you could have it in the resolution, some unknown character walking away from a fallen enemy. And then we could use structural techniques such as flashback, where we move back. Once we've hooked the reader's attention, we'll move back in time and we'll show how things got to this point. Now, we wouldn't give it the complete finished resolution, where the end of the story, but it's where the moment is about to be resolved or the climax is about to happen. And then we'd possibly use flashback and we'd still keep building onto our rising action to make that tense and exciting. Okay, and you can see this actually. This is from GCSE AQA's GCSE language paper. This is the actual mark scheme, and it actually says using these structural techniques just to kind of make it as compelling and interesting as possible, really. But yeah, we use these structural techniques to kind of make it as interesting as possible. So we've got the varied and inventive use of structural features. So thinking about kind of how you're telling the story and what order you're telling the story in order to kind of excite the reader most. I always tend to think of this as in think of a horror film. Okay, horror film, how do they kind of build that tension, or how do they kind of put it together? Even such simple things as dialogue can be a structural feature. So they're all individual choices that you can choose to make it as exciting as possible, and the examiner will pick up on this. Okay, so we've got a few techniques here. Okay, now if you want to use this as a home learning resource, what you could do is you could pause the video now and see if you can give any kind of your personal definitions of any of these techniques and things like that. Okay, so feel free to have a go at writing down these yourself, and you could use it as revision if you've watched this video before. And then in a second, I'm going to show you the answers and we're going to go through the techniques. So here are the answers. We've got narrative voice, so who is telling the story? This can be either in first, second, or third person. And when you're analysing this, you've got to think that it's always going to be a deliberate choice. So first person is the main character. You've seen it through the eyes of the main character. So it's the most emotional, the most dramatic that you'll feel. Second person is very, very rarely used. It's when it's someone observing the main character happen. I'll tend to stay clear of this. Then third person is when you can move from different characters' perspectives. For those people who play computer games, I tend to say that first person is like Call of Duty, third person is like Grand Theft Auto, and each one gives you a distinct advantage. We've got change in focus, so moving from one thing to another to show that something is significant going to happen. So it's kind of like if you've constantly shifting back to talking about a gun that's hanging above a bar. Okay, constantly talking about this gun, you know that something significant is going to happen, but you're just going to switch the audience attention really quickly. You can do this by changing paragraph. Just quickly talk about the gun. So the gun sat silent on its shelf watching the argument, and then go back to the argument and showing that the gun is going to be involved somehow. Next one is perspective shifts. That's moving from one person's point of view to another. This could be from moving from inside to out. My favourite one is when people hear a scream, either from inside a room or outside a room, and then they have to imagine what has happened or the sound of a confrontation, and it allows them their imagination to really think what has happened. Next one is flashback or non-linear structure. So non-linear means not happening in a straight line. So yeah, you can move forward or backward in time, just to kind of, entice the reader to try and get them to find out what's happened. Okay, here's a few more techniques. Okay, so these are all techniques that you're allowed to mention in the exam, or you're allowed to use in the writing exam. So we've got dialogue, foreshadowing, paragraph length and line length. We've got setting and cliffhanger. And same as before, you can pause the video now if you want, have a go at writing down these definitions yourselves, and then I'll go through the answers. Okay, so dialogue is just when characters speak. It's a really good technique to mention when doing your structure analysis, because most stories will have some form of dialogue. Whether the writer has used it for a specific technique to make things more tense and exciting depends upon the actual story you're looking at. As well, when you're doing creative writing, if you have written a piece without any dialogue, that's probably going to be a bad thing. Okay, it's a great way to kind of break up the structure of your paragraphs as well. You get to introduce speech marks, possibly an exclamation mark as well. So it's really kind of gives you an opportunity to utilize some more of your skills just in your creative writing. Next one is foreshadowing. So that's when the writer hints at something that's going to happen. Okay, so it could be something good or something bad. We can use short length paragraphs to create a sense of pace. We can drip feed the audience a small piece of information. When you're analysing structure, whenever they have changed paragraph, it's just a good thing to do to question, why is the writer changed paragraph here? What effects are they trying to create, if they are in fact trying to create a deliberate effect? And next one is setting. So the establishment of setting, it reinforces any sense of foreshadowing, and it does affect the overall tone and feel of the text. So the setting, for example, for Frankenstein was deliberately chosen, because it does all that lovely foreshadowing and it sets the tone and things like that. And if the setting had been changed instead to a shopping centre on a beautiful Saturday morning, the effect would have been completely different. Next is cliffhanger. So that's when the story ends unresolved, leaving the reader wondering how it ended. Did the main character live through the event? Things like that. Okay, so here's a text that you guys can use to look at yourself. If you want to pause the video to read it yourselves, then by all means. If not, I'll read it myself. Okay. So slowly the wind took the tree branches in its cold grip and shook them in a silent, slow dance. Tim walked down the muddy, uneven path, past the broken gravestones and the new hole that was yet to be filled. Tonight that hole will be filled like a hand into a glove, and the one who betrayed him will have the light extinguished from them. So this first paragraph is all written from Tim's point of view. Then we have the paragraph change, and it's also another change which I hope you'll be able to pick up on. Tim's wife Maggie smiled at Dominic. She couldn't believe she had fallen for her husband's brother. Looking at him, she knew they would be together for the rest of their lives. So here the writer has established a new character's point of view. So it's that perspective change, should have hopefully picked up on that. And we already know that Tim is walking through a graveyard and the mood is very, very dark and sinister. And then we see this another change of paragraph. We have a sense of a dialogue. 1, 2, 3. The sound of Tim's sing-song voice cut through the night air. Dominic's face turned ghostly white. He remembered the sound. He had heard it as a child right before Tim came to find him to end their game of hide and seek. Okay, so all of those things there have been written deliberately in order to kind of invoke a sense of excitement for the reader. So we're going to have a look at some quotes here, just to kind of show how you could approach this in the exam. So we've got Tim's wife Maggie smiled at Dominic. So that was perspective shift. We had first Tim walking along, and then we had Tim's wife who was smiling at the man that she was cheating with. So the one who betrayed him will have the light extinguished from them is an example of foreshadowing. So something is going to happen, some murder in this case. To end their game of hide and seek is a cliffhanger, and it's a cliffhanger because we do not know if the murder will be committed. So whenever you are talking about why something is interesting, always try and include something we call context. So that is the actual situation that is involved. So we know that from this situation there's quite a lot at stake because Tim is in the mood to commit murder and he's about to catch his brother and his wife committing quite a horrible act of betrayal, from Tim's point of view. And we've got 1, 2, 3 is dialogue. Now you could say a lot of things about that dialogue, that a man is about to find his wife cheating on him and he's singing like a child, very kind of suggestive that he's not in the right kind of mental state and that he's going to do something quite sinister and quite creepy possibly. Okay, so here's a sample answer. So I'd choose one particular quote. If you're going for a very high level answer and you've got another quote that you could use that supports the initial point that you're trying to make, then I'd recommend you to do that. Otherwise, I would say stick with the one quote and try and just develop that as much as you can, as I've tried to do here. So I said, the writer has used dialogue to interest the reader. 1, 2, 3. The sound of Tim's sing-song voice. This is interesting, so I'm trying to immediately answer the question. This is interesting because it shows the reader the mental state of the character. In this part of the story, the character is about to catch his wife with his brother. In this moment of rising action, the countdown speech of the character marks the point of the inevitable confrontation. The dialogue is a contrast to the seriousness of the situation, showing that the character has become a little crazed, hinting at a violent climax, so there I am using my technical language. The reader is morbidly fascinated to find out what will happen as the dialogue suggests something bad is going to happen. Now that's just a sample answer. I could have also used the words foreshadowing, because we've already had the foreshadowing that someone is going to die kind of thing, and that's why it's very, very exciting. So this is just my interpretation of why I think the writer has tried to make this exciting, but your own interpretation might be a little bit different. So I've used the kind of classic piece structure, piece paragraph structure. If you're unsure about what that is, I've made a video, so be sure to check that out. It can be applied for both structure and for language analysis questions. Okay, and here I'd probably give myself about a level 3 because I'd say it's clear, relevant explanation. I'd say that it explains clearly the effects of the writer's choice of structural features. I haven't quite used a range of relevant examples, but that's probably where I would possibly include a smaller quote of the foreshadowing, and I would say that I've used the clear and accurate use of subject terminology. So I'd say that's at least 5 out of 8 marks for this one, which is what you need to be averaging if you want to get a pass. But I think you should always try and try and develop past just a pass mark, because you never know what slip you might make in the exam. So question 3, this is the question we've been talking about. How has the writer structured the text to interest the reader? And just some key tips here. Try and think about any kind of deliberate structural techniques that they've used and how it's been used to kind of keep the reader engaged. So what does it suggest will happen? Does the writer deny information to the reader to make them want to find out what happens? We tend to slow the story down as much as possible. So key things, just really key basics. You have to use quotes and you have to mention the structural terms as well as the structural techniques. And by structural terms, I mean things like mention rising action, exposition, if you possibly can. And then any structural techniques, you need to mention structural techniques, no language techniques at all. always try and mention things that have been used to deliver the story to you. That's one way of looking at it. Okay, finally, guys, if you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. I've got plenty of videos on GCSE and functional skills, so feel free to have a look. And I've also got resources on tests, a lot of free resources that are free to download. And if anybody needs any help or wants some more sample answers, feel free to leave me a comment down below. I'm happy to respond and engage with that. Okay, guys, thanks a lot.